Welcome to the Chapter 26 Flipped Classroom. This chapter will discuss Africa and its role in the Atlantic world. So looking at the slave trade and the impact of the slave trade, and also the role of Africans in American society. Now, I started this PowerPoint out with this picture because it represents one of the biggest things that this chapter is going to be talking about, which is the African slave trade. And one interesting thing to note here is who is driving this group of slaves. You've got men, women, even children being driven by this man. Check out what he has and who he is, because that is an important feature of the African slave trade. There are four main overarching concepts in this chapter. The first is that sub-Saharan Africa was influenced, basically like the rest of the world, by the establishment of the global trading networks during the early modern age. European merchants who were lured by the possibility of trading opportunities and profits increasingly visited the coasts. The rise of these wealthy port cities and powerful coastal kingdoms reduced but didn't eliminate the trans-Saharan trade. Slavery, both African and Islamic, had been a part of Africa for centuries, but the increased slave trade, because of the European involvement, dwarfed its predecessors and actually constituted the largest migration in history before the 19th century. Not only that, but when millions of Africans were captured and sold into slavery, their home societies were often left in chaos in Africa. Lastly, the integration of African and American society laid the foundations for a complex African diaspora. Remember what the word diaspora means. We've talked about that word before in the Western Hemisphere. This created a really unique culture. So we're going to begin by looking at the political world in Africa at this time and how it shifts. We covered this in the map in class, and the map was very visual, and this will give you more of a historical, concrete examples. All right, so the main idea is that Africa moves from more imperial states like Mali to more regional states, such as those listed below. The Songhai Empire, which carried an imperial tradition of Mali, so it's in the same place, that's why we put it on the map during the last period, reached its peak during the 15th century, and its leader was Sunni Ali. Now, as his name alludes to, this was an Islamic empire. Under their patronage, Timbuktu, a major trading city, also became a major center for Islamic learning, with a library, a huge hospital, centers of education, etc. However, because of the loss of the trans-Saharan trade, and also because of the rise in other African states owning guns, firearms, the Songhai Empire disintegrated, and Africa in general moved away from larger regional imperial states towards smaller states. Some of these regional states included Dahomey, Congo, and Oyo. Now, the things that these three have in common are that they all participated in the slave trade. Oftentimes, they were the suppliers of slaves as coastal kingdoms. So they sold people from further in the interior of Africa to European traders. They were all coastal. And they all interacted with Portugal. We will learn a little bit more about these kingdoms when we watch the video in class. So let's take a look at some of these more specifically. First of all, we have the Kingdom of Congo. Um, the King of Congo, Afonso I, converted to Christianity and encouraged his subjects to do the same. This was after his interaction with the Portuguese. This tie to Portugal, however, didn't protect Congo from Portuguese slave raiders or invasions, and there was attempted invasions on the Kingdom of Congo. Further to the south, the remarkable Queen Njinsa fought a 40-year battle to keep the Portuguese from conquering Ndongo. And she was pretty successful. However, her successors were not, and Angola became the first European colony in sub-Saharan Africa. Angola is the European colony of Ndongo. In the far south, the Dutch established the colony of Cape Town in 1652. Now, these Dutch settlers were some of the first Europeans in the South, and they came to dominate the local people who were known as the Khoikhoi, or the San. So if we look at the picture here, you can see the King of Congo and the European ambassadors, and you'll see that the king in this picture is incredibly powerful. Also, it's kind of interesting to note this European chandelier. These are the Europeans. So this whole idea of Europeans completely dominating African kingdoms is false. There were still very powerful African kings, and in fact, these kings oftentimes did control part of the slave trade. Now moving into look at religion. As usual, religious and social pressures went hand in hand with these political changes that were brought by invading Europeans. In the case of first Islam and then Christianity, there were challenges to animistic African beliefs. And we've talked about how this resulted in syncretic blends as older belief systems fused with newer concepts. The Fulani, representative of many who were concerned about the purity of Islam from the north, the Fulani are in northwest Nigeria. Sorry about that pause. There was some noise in the hall. And these groups were concerned with the purity of Islam. They, in fact, still are raging wars because of the desire to implement Islamic law. There are some other examples of fusion between Christianity and syncretic traditions. For example, an interesting syncretic version of Christianity appeared in the Congo in the 1700s. Donna Beatrix proposed that Jesus Christ was actually a black African. Now, this is very interesting because cultures often do this. Renaissance Italy proposed Jesus as being a completely Caucasian person, and that is false as well. But the Europeans were obviously being these kind of Renaissance Europeans or 1450 Europeans were very upset about this. or 1700 Europeans, excuse me. And in the end, she was burned at the stake by the Christian king of Congo as a heretic. And also, we already talked about how Alfonso the First converted people or encouraged people to convert to Christianity. That's where we'll stop for the first part of the chapter. We'll be getting into trade and slavery and the diaspora in the second part of the PowerPoint.